So Kaley, we're going to start out with, how do you prioritize self-care in your life? And what does that look like for you?
Well, that's a great question. I would say for me, as far as prioritizing, exercise for me is a big deal. Part of that is because I often deal with insomnia. And if I don't exercise, I don't sleep. So I exercise.
That's a great motivator.
So that it is a great motivator. And so I do it's a really high priority for me to get exercise. So and I think once I figured out how much that helped me, I would say, so since my kids were little, even when they were little, I put exercise pretty high up. So that's one of the ways that I prioritize self-care. And then I try to always have some time during the day that I can be by myself and try to spend time. Usually for me, it's spending time with God. And it could be through just being quiet with God. It could be praying. It could be reading my Bible, but anything like that. So I try, both of those things are pretty high on my list of what I would consider. That's kind of what I need to get through the day. And sometimes, of course, they get pushed to the side, but I would say consistently, I keep those two things are really consistent in my life. So
kind of your non-negotiables, especially workout one. You want to sleep. You need sleep. You're doing a lot of things. Oh my goodness. Confidently setting boundaries. Now you are, like I said earlier, you're doing a lot of things. You have a whole life outside of the little moments we get you at the Volunteer Center of Lubbock with your two teenagers, with your speaking that you do in the ministry world as a leader in that space, you and your husband, pastoring at Broadway Church of Christ, and all of the nonprofit and faith-based work you do out of that. So, boom, that's a lot. So how do you set boundaries and make the decisions on where you're going to put your time?
That's another great question. I think as time has gone on, some of that has evolved. So I would say I try to put my family first, usually. And that can be hard. You can get so involved, like even when I was staying home and not working, you can get so involved in volunteering and being on different boards and committees that you don't have a paid job, but you still don't see your children.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of learn how, what, for me, a lot of it is in trying and saying yes or no is this something that I really want to do? Because when you say yes to things, you start getting asked to do almost everything. Because you're the person who will say yes.
Yeah.
So like, for example, for me, this is just like a little example, but I do I've done PTA stuff through the years. Now I am on PTA with people who do so much more than I do, but I kind of have I'll be on one PTA board at a time. I cannot do 2 to 3. I think one year I did do 2 PTA boards, but other than that, I just do the one. And then with booster clubs with sports, then they have their own thing, but I choose on those to just be like someone who volunteers at the concession stand. And there's a lot of people who are willing to do the booster club roles, and so you just have to learn to say no. It's like, and then with church stuff, again, it's just deciding. So a lot of it is time based, and can I do this or can I not do this, and trying not to feel obligated because of other people's expectations. And I think that is one of the things when you're the spouse of someone on staff, that was pretty hard. When we first came here, I was 36. And so learning how to navigate that has taken some time, but just figuring out how do I, what do I say no to because I really can't do it or don't want to do it. Sometimes I do things I don't want to do because they're the right thing to do, but sometimes there's a lot of stuff that it doesn't really matter. It's not really, if I do it or not, nothing's gonna, it's not going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
So, and then a lot with my kids being older now, there's times I just say, no, I can't, this is not a phase of life that I can do that.
Yeah. And learning those when you transition out of one and into the other, because I remember that space where I was just like, I got to a space when my kids were transitioning into junior high and high school, and just all of a sudden the time demands on their extracurriculars went through the roof. And I had to be like, I am giving half of me to everything right now.
Yeah.
This is not working. And that's not how I want to operate. And, and I would feel safe in saying you're the same way too. And so, all right, it's just time to move out of that season into this new one. And that's just going to have to be okay.
Yeah. And you just think like, I only have so many years, I have a senior, so I have 1 year left, so like there's a committee that I've done a couple of summers that I was on, that this last summer, I just said, no, I can't, because I don't want to, I don't want to spend tons of my summertime when I have, it's one of my last summers to have both my kids at home, to spend that much time working on this, so
time that you don't get back.
Right. Yeah.
And you hit on one earlier too. And I have several different friends throughout my years that have worked in ministry or are in ministry through our different travels. And we talked about this with Stephanie Hunter a couple of weeks ago, is you kind of live a fishbowl life. And so, you're having to kind of navigate that as well. And you and Carl are very firm in how you believe and what you believe. And sometimes it's contrary to some of the audiences that you run into here. How do you set boundaries there as just even a couple?
Well, I think for me, one thing about with us, I think, I guess that I'll clarify first is just, I have a pretty big heart for ministry too, so, and I think, I listen to Stephanie and she definitely does too, and so, and I'm a pretty strong personality on my own. So, and so Carl and I together, can be, we're often a team, even
kind of a force.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we're a force, but we're often a team. And sometimes I'm pretty independent. So like a lot of the things we do at church, we actually even do separately. Like I'll teach Sunday, I'll teach a class and he'll be teaching a different class, or we'll do, we'll do some different things that way. And then, but then as far as how we navigate, I'm sorry, now I've talked so much, I can't remember.
Well, just how you guys even navigate boundaries for yourself as a couple.
Yeah. I think as a couple, we have to, sometimes it's hard to be honest, because there's things that he might feel like we should do that I don't feel like we should do, and sometimes I feel like we should do something and he doesn't feel like we should do that. So a lot of it requires talking it out and deciding, and compromising sometimes and figuring out what we're going to do. I would say we both are pretty passionate about there's a few things we're both really passionate about. And so for example, one thing going on in Lubbock right now that we've been involved in that's been really important to us is a movement with racial reconciliation. And we've been involved in some different conversations with that, with church leaders that are across the city. And so a lot of times if it comes to that, then we're going to be involved in that, Right. And so we'll say yes, unless we have, which this happens right now quite a bit. Sometimes there's something happening and we can't go because of something with our kids, or maybe one of us can't go, we have to manage that. But I think sometimes that's how we draw our boundaries. It's like, this is something that we really feel called to. And then we have on other things, if it's not something we feel as called to, then we feel called to relationships. So if we can go to someone's event, but there are times we have so many events to try to go to, and we try to do like the pop in, pop out, sometimes. And we love all the people, but sometimes it's just a lot. It can be a lot of events. COVID has slowed that down, obviously. So some of that is pre-COVID, but a lot of those events have all started going again. So
well, and even just making space for you to just be a couple outside of all the stuff too.
Yes.
I think that's probably another challenge? Do you have a way that you deal with that? Do you have like, we're going to go to coffee once a month or whatever?
Well, we are really, we're really lucky in that we both are runners. So we run in the mornings together.
Nice.
And so that gives us a good connection. When we moved here, I had a knee injury and I really worked hard to get better, partly because that running time was so important to us and having time to talk. Yeah. Right now we're running at like 6:15. So we're not quite as confident.
We're waking up on the run together.
Right. And then we walk together almost every evening. We started that when we had our little dog and he passed away, but we still try most nights. We still walk a little bit together. Nice. So we connect that way. And then when we were in Austin, we used to every Friday, we would have a Friday date during the day because he's off on Fridays. Yeah. But in Lubbock, that kind of fell apart a little bit, partly because besides going to eat, I mean, we have some things here we like to do, like, but
Kaley and I are both Lubbock transplants, so we can talk about this more honestly.
I mean, we go out to eat, but and there'll be days like we might do a bike ride or we might do, but in the Austin area, we had like a lot of different places we could go and like ride our bikes or go on hikes or whatever. And here we do have a few places, but it's not the variety is, Yeah. So, but we still try to do something once a week that's outside of that. I would say phase of life has made it right now.
Absolutely.
Where it's a little harder, but
I love how you've identified the running and the walking. That's something you can do.
That's a lot of time together.
Yeah. And you've carved out that space. That's awesome. I love that. Okay. Thank you for that. Taking care of our emotional health as much as our physical health. How do you navigate that? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I mean, for me, the running or all of that. And then because I'm getting older and the knee injury, I have to stretch a lot too. So I try to do cardio and flexibility every day, and then I think it's so important. I mean, I tend to be a pretty healthy eater most of the time. And I think it makes a huge difference on how you eat and getting exercise. It all affects my emotional, the physical affects my emotional for sure. Yeah, for sure. Partly because if I'm not sleeping, I'm in a pretty bad emotional state.
It's all downhill from there.
Right. Yes. But also when you're, like if you don't eat well and your stomach hurt, none of that is fun. So
it's all connected.
It is.
And even how you feed your body, how you feed your mind. You talked about, earlier in talking about how you had your quiet time and you're right. It's all connected. And I think that we are hearing more acceptance about that over the last 10 to 15 years, but there's been so many years where I think people treated them as two separate entities. It's like, no, these all matter.
All connected.
All have an effect on each other. How can we, and I think you do a great job of this because you are just very confidently, firmly planted in your faith and how it plays out in your life. I just observing you do a really good job in watching you of living out the things that the Bible talks about, being a good neighbor and loving people the way you want to be loved. And that feeds into you talked about earlier, how you're kind of your own strong, confident self. How can we support ourselves and other women in living, I call it unapologetically. Women are notorious for saying sorry for things that they have no responsibility for. And I feel like you model that really well. So talk about that.
Well, thank you. I think helping all of us really be, you've talked about, I've heard you talk about this on your podcast, but be who we're created to be. Yeah. And we don't have to be just like everyone else. I think that's one of the, it's just one of the biggest lies of our culture that we all need to be just like everyone else, or that we need to fit this certain model. And that model changes a little bit, maybe city to city and state to state, what culture you find yourself in. But I think for me, moving here, coming from Austin, at first, I was trying to figure out like, who am I supposed to be in love? And it took like a year to kind of say, I can just be myself, like I don't have to be this picture perfect, like preacher's wife. I don't have to dress I can still dress the way I like to dress. Which is pretty casual. I mean, I would say overall, Austin was a good fit for me as far as just kind of way of life. And here, but I found that being myself here, I was great. And people weren't like, oh, I can't believe you're not dressed up, or whatever. And so, and I think helping other women do that too, you don't, and especially our younger, I guess I think of our younger women, just be who God created you to be, and you don't have to fit a mold that's been put in front of us, as the mold you're supposed to be, whether that's like something that maybe you're, that's created by, I think it's all culturally created, like an idea of like I want to put air quotes around it, but like this idea within certain circles, maybe of what a Christian woman looks like, which I think a Christian woman looks like someone who loves God and loves people and is connected to God. And outside of that, you can be whoever you want. I mean, like, be filled with the fruits of the Spirit, all of them, and then be who God created. It doesn't mean you have to be quiet or demure or this or that. We can all be. The women in the Bible are very diverse.
Yes. They're not strong voices,
and they're very strong. Yeah, and when you read about women in the Bible, they're very, very strong. And so, how we got this idea that you have to live in to live in this quiet space and say you're sorry. And that doesn't mean if you're naturally quiet, be naturally quiet. That's great.
Don't apologize for that either.
That's right. There are really quiet people and they're wonderful, So I think that's, I think accepting that God creates us all so differently and we can be different. We don't have to, I don't like a lot of, this is maybe off topic, but a lot of things that you'll read where it makes it sound like everyone has to fit a mold as a person, or even like with parenting, that if to be a good parent, do A, B, C, D, E, and then that'll all equal the perfect child. I'm like, no.
Because those kids are all made differently too.
No, that's right. That's right. So the world is so much more complex, and that's what brings beauty to it.
Yes. Well, and I think that and I will say it. I mean, there are definitely people in this world that have a specific idea of what people in ministry should look like and what they should or should not espouse. And that's just, no, there's not a box. Quit trying to put me in it, and because that's not from God. Right. Not from God.
Right. Yes.
So I love it. I love that you do that.
Well, thank you.
Did that. And I saw that with one of my favorite things about you from day one. The importance of setting and coming back to your why in everything you do. And I think we kind of touched on this earlier, but I think this has to be important for you because, again, I mean, you are doing so many things. I mean, you're off speaking in these places all over the country and navigating time with your kids and all of those different committees like you talked about earlier, and just your responsibilities here at Broadway and the job. So what? Talk about your why and how you navigate that.
Well, I think for my why, I think it all stems out of my faith. And then, but from there, I mean, there's obviously for a lot of people, that's what their why is, and yet we can still be called to really different things. So, I think the way that I've been thinking of it more lately, I've done, quite a decent amount of work with the Enneagram, and Suzanne Stabile she's written quite a bit about it and has a podcast, and she talks about what is mine to do, And so that's something that I think of sometimes, is what is mine to do? Is this mine to do, or is this not mine to do?
Yeah.
And so when I think of the why question, that's probably kind of the phrasing that I use for it. And some of it is, am I someone who is needed in this space, or am I not really needed? Like if I'm needed, then I'm happy to fill that space. Yeah. But if there's like a million people who want to do this, then what, I got a lot of other things to do.
Yeah.
So sometimes that's how I figure out, sometimes that's my why, is there's so many good things to do, Another thing that I've been thinking about lately is I think that I've always been someone, and I mean from a pretty young age, that I see different problems and want to help be a part of helping fix them. Or I want to, at least, maybe the better way to phrase that is, I want to think about how to fix them. So, I found something that I'd written like in the third grade that had to do with like how to help poverty, So it's been something that, it's just something, I guess. I know. But of course, the older you get, the more you realize these problems are so complex. Yeah. There's no easy solution to any of it. And so, when an opportunity opens for me to kind of walk in to do something in my community to help with something, and it can be very small. For example, like Habitat just did their Blitz build, Yeah. And so at our church, we really, we pushed it. We raised some money for it. We did those things. And I went and volunteered just a little bit. I couldn't volunteer the whole, my life. And really, I wouldn't be that much of a help to volunteer for 10 days.
Me either. I'm with you.
But I went up and tried to help recruit people, and went up and did some time there. And it's just like a small thing that I can do to help with a really big issue. And if everybody would look for opportunities that are around you, we get so worked up thinking about national problems, but then we forget about our own community. And if we all worked in our own communities, we could really help solve, would help solve a lot of different issues. So I would say that's another one of my whys is, will this help? Will this be helpful to someone? And that's a big question, because sometimes we do things that are not helpful. So I really always want to be intentional. And there are times that people put together things that it's not helpful.
Right.
So,
no matter the intention.
And so I try to think about, will this be something that's helpful and help,
Well, and I like what you said earlier too, because I think for someone in your position, there are times, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to impose this on you, but I think there's probably times you get asked to do things because we're like, well, we need to ask Kaley because she's, she and her husband are on staff at Broadway, and we need to include them, and we don't want to leave them out. So I think having your why in place even more important there, so you can kind of help them. All right, I'm good. Right. I don't need to be at this thing. I appreciate it, but thanks.
Thanks. But I think pre-COVID, that was probably more of a, of a thing. Since COVID, a lot of the big events there haven't been as many, so that was an interesting, that shutdown was, for us, was like a chance to breathe in some ways.
Talk about that.
You feel bad.
Has that reshaped as we're coming back out? Has that reshaped your why or how you approach these things? Did you have any kind of epiphanies during that time, or was it just a good time to take a breath and take a rest?
I think a lot of it was probably taking a rest, but also I think it did help me kind of narrow down some, like, these are things that I'm really committed to. And then these other things I will do if I can, so I don't know if that makes sense, but you kind of have like a tier level of these are things I'm committed to. And I think I have, for me, some non-negotiables on, like, this is what I'm committed to. And if people around me, if there's opposition to that, then that's okay, but I'm still committed to it. I'm not going to back away from things I'm really committed to, even if it doesn't fit other people's perceptions of who I should be or what I should do,
Which is a perfect segue into our next talking point, growing out of your own expectations versus others. I think you do that pretty well. So talk about establishing that and in your journey in that, because I think that that's something we all kind of have to journey in as we're navigating cases.
I think you're right. I think, one thing about me is I have pretty high expectations for myself. And so that's something I've had to learn to manage because I have to learn to tell myself, like, you cannot do everything, And I don't even, I'm not talking about going to everything. I just mean like,
having your finger in everything.
Right. Yeah. Have my finger in everything, have my house just the way I want it to be, my yard just the way I want it to be, my time with my kids. There's literally not enough time in the day. So I have to just let go of some things. And then I think too, the learning to manage my own expectations versus others, that has been, I would say that's been a growing point for me because, when there's things it's hard for me to remember now because it feels so long ago. I feel like I used to, I'm trying to think of if I feel like when it came to ministry, probably when we were in Austin, my husband was a campus minister. And I don't know that I really felt a lot of expectations on me personally. I probably did some like with our college students, but I had a heart for ministry. So I wanted to be pretty involved, and I loved being with college students. So it wasn't really anything. I don't remember feeling the weight of a lot of expectation, but definitely as we grew older and then moved into like a different role here, those expectations increase. But I think there's the older I've gotten and the more confident, I guess, that I've gotten in just deciding this is who I am. And then still trying, for me, sometimes it's managing that and then thinking about trying to see things from other people's perspectives. Because sometimes it's like maybe an idea I have about something is very different than an idea somebody else has about something. And they may expect me to have their idea. Yeah. And I don't,
Yeah.
So I have to try to meet those moments with grace, the way that I would want to be met, and just try to be graceful in that. I guess.
And I think we're getting a lot of opportunities to practice that very thing, especially in the last couple of years, and doing it in a way that is both, this is where I'm at, but honoring and respectful, and that doesn't make that person the enemy.
Right.
They are not their idea or their belief.
That's right.
They are just, and I struggle with this. I mean, just remembering God made us all.
Right. And we all change. I mean, that's one of the things for me, because, like I have thoughts now I never even thought about 5 years ago.
Absolutely.
That I didn't, and which is embarrassing now, but it's, things that were just not even in my awareness. Yeah. And then I have things that I thought about the way things should be 20 years ago that I now think very differently. Yeah. So I try to remember that when I'm talking, listening and talking, just that we all change, we all evolve. And what I think now may be different in 5 to 10 years. And that's hard because it's not hard to think that, but it is hard sometimes because I can feel so convicted about something. Sure. And I don't want to feel like I'm backing down, but I also have to recognize with humility that there is a possibility I'm not right about everything.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely, I mean, I 100% relate to this because, I talked about in other episodes 10 years ago, I was a very different thinker, believer, voter than I am now. If you would have told me 10 years ago that I would be in this space now, I would have fought you on that. I mean, and I think I have learned more in the last probably 5 to 7 years than I've learned in my whole entire life, because I really came to a point in understanding that we're always evolving, we're always changing, and to keep being a learner and to hold these things loosely, be committed. I mean, there are things that I'm absolutely committed to that I don't waver from.
Right.
But there's a lot of things out of that have changed because I've just learned. I've been in different environments. I've met different people. I've had different experiences or saw different experiences, and it changed the way I think. So I think what you're saying is so true. And just holding that loosely, and in terms of humility and just the understanding that you're going to, if you're willing, because I know people that haven't moved one iota because they're just unwilling. Right. They either have stayed in the same space and haven't moved and are kind of unwilling to. And that just hasn't been how, we have functioned in our family. So I think you bring up some really good points there too. But again, going back to that whole idea of remembering that. So when you're dealing with people that have different views than you, it's like, well, ding, ding, ding. You might have been where that person was 5 years ago. So how would you want to have been dealt with? And that's still something I am getting a grasp on. Learning, growing. Speaking of all the learning and growing, accepting the layered aspects of ourselves. And what I mean by that is we tend to want to really highlight, I call them those Instagram moments, those things that people kind of see on the surface. And we don't really want to talk about the difficult, challenging, not so great things, but they're all part of making us who we are. And I'm in the middle of a journey right now where I'm really unpacking that and really taking the lids off of and uncovering some things and just realizing it's all part of what's made me who I am. Talk about that journey for you.
Oh, that's a good question. Just embracing those different layers of ourselves. I think it's all so important. I mean, for me, I think, I said I'm a talkative introvert, Yeah. So like there's a couple, I'm probably right on the line of like introverted, extroverted, And so like, I have that layer to me that really wants to be by myself or just with a very small group. And I could easily get to a place where that is all that I want, that's all that I want. But then, because of life in general, I have to get out of that and go into other spaces where then I just love it, and I'm with people and I love being with people. And so I think of that almost like if I cut myself off and I only did the one, I would never experience the other, and they're both really, really meaningful to me. And so that's one of the layers thing that I think of. I'm trying to think of because can you define again, like with the different layers?
Well, I think we all have some parts of our lives that we either made decisions or we're in seasons that wish we could take back, do differently, not talk about. Maybe we're, ashamed of or wish hadn't happened, whatever that is. And we tend to want to sweep those under the rug instead of be like, that was part of my journey. And sweeping that under the rug and not processing and integrating that into me doesn't actually service me well.
Yeah, I think learning from all those. And then for me, just also to say, to just give it, to recognize it for what it is and to give it to God and say, would you just continue to shape me into who you want me to be, and accept his grace for those moments, and to know that he, I just have a strong belief that we're all made in the image of God. Every single person in this world is made in the image of God. And he has such a deep love for us. And so even when we mess up, I think he holds us in those times, And so So just for me, some of it may just be accepting God's love.
Yeah.
In the midst of recognizing that I messed up, that I did something that I wish I hadn't done, but that he still loves me as much then as he did any other time, know?
And I forgiving ourselves. I think we have a harder time forgiving ourselves. And if we can't forgive ourselves, then we can't accept forgiveness from anybody else.
Right. Yeah. And then we can't really forgive others, and we can't, until we are able to accept that in ourselves, it's really hard to offer it to other people.
Yeah.
So kind of like you were talking about with grace towards others, like we were just talking about, and just accepting people being at different points. And it's the same thing with us. And it's the same thing with our children and with our spouses. We have to be able to accept that we are still, people who are beloved and forgiven, and before we can really offer that to somebody else,
Absolutely. And so, that's a great point.
To be able to love them when we all have to be loved when we're at our worst.
Well, and accepting their layers too. I mean, I think, and you can't accept other people's layers until you can accept your own layers. Not really authentically.
Right. That's a great point. Yes.
Okay. What are some practices? And we've kind of talked about this, but it's going to kind of, I think, bring all those things together. But what are some practices you use to process your emotions in a healthy way? Because I think that's got to be tricky. I mean, you could probably, I'm guessing with all the roles you have, you could probably be put in some kind of tricky situations with that sometimes.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because my Enneagram work, I have, what I've learned about myself is that I am someone who has a hard time processing emotions.
Lesson one.
I know, right? I mean, my number on the Enneagram is one that does have a heart, like stuffs emotions, so, or because I don't have time for it. Yeah. And so I've had to learn even just like to name feelings and to, to do all of that, because I am the kind of the stereotypical female is someone who always wants to talk about their feelings and always wants to do, and I want to talk about ideas and actions, and I don't necessarily talk about feelings, so, so learning how to, first of all, I've learned to like name emotions.
Yeah. That's a great practice though. Yeah.
To say like, what am I feeling right now? And sometimes that's a hard question for me. What am I feeling? I don't know what I'm feeling. I'm feeling stressed. That's often, I think for me, that's the emotion that, and I don't even know if that's an emotion, but that's what I'll like feel the highest. I
think you can start with that and you're like, okay, I feel stressed. Right. Okay, what's causing me to feel stressed? Yes. And then it kind of breaks down from there. But I've talked about, my daughters have talked about that a lot. Because they've all done Enneagram stuff. I have a love-hate relationship with the Enneagram that we won't go into today. But they have, and a lot of their friends have. So they'll like name their friends as numbers. Like, they're an 8. Yeah, they're a 2. Yeah, they're a 3. And so they, but that knowledge about them really helps them. And sometimes in knowing how to communicate with them, or knowing how they're going to guessing or having an idea how they're going to respond in a situation. And one of the things that they've all talked about is naming their emotions and calling them so that they can actually process them and getting to the nitty gritty. So I think that's a really important, powerful thing, because we don't, this podcast is called the Fuel Podcast. Right. But we really don't want to take the time to stop and feel, because somewhere along the way we decided feeling our emotions was weak versus actually it's strong, because about processing them and feeling them and navigating them and calling them out, we can't be our best, wholest, I don't even wholest, is that a word? Healthiest self. Right. And
it hurts us a lot in relationships if we can't feel, if we can't allow ourselves to feel and then to know what we're feeling, because then we just kind of our behavior may change and no one knows why, including us sometimes, Right. So I think that like being able to think about, I feel sad. Why do I feel sad? And really kind of think through what is it that's bringing this emotion right now, and what's making me feel this way. I think for me, it's hardest when it's negative emotions. You know, it's easy to think about why I have positive emotions and processing that, but having more negative emotions and trying to, and I shouldn't even say negative, but just having a sadder, less happy emotion.
No, that's a really good point though, because I think you brought up a good point there. The culture, we've decided that anything that's not happy or joyful is negative.
Right.
Instead of just like, that's just emotions that we were created with that have a purpose. They're letting us know that something has affected us in a certain way and needs to be walked through, processed, navigated. And the only thing that's really negative is if we don't actually take the time to do that.
Right.
But the
that's
culture
exactly
has told
right.
us, and I think that's where we get a lot of caustic positivity. And I would say that I think Christians are really guilty of this. And like, no, we need to own it all. It needs to actually feel safe to own it all. It needs to feel safe, because otherwise people just end up putting on shows because it doesn't feel safe. And it doesn't feel like a place you can really be authentic and vulnerable.
Right. And just say, have times you say, I'm not really doing great today, you know, because there's the like, how are you? I'm good. How are you? Good.
Yeah.
You know,
no, you're absolutely right. Like, you know, actually that can be kind of rough.
Right. And just saying,
and that's okay. And that's okay. I'm not, you don't need to feel bad for me about that. That's just where we are.
Yes. We're so used to the whole like greeting of how are you? Good. How are you? Good.
Yeah.
That if somebody just says, okay, I'm okay. That seems like what's the matter? You know?
Yes. And maybe it's as simple as I got 5 hours of sleep last night.
Right. A lot of times. Yes, I know. I've got more going on than I know how to deal with, you know? So,
And this is kind of segues into how do you live out, finding empowerment, embracing layers? How do you walk that out in your life? And this is kind of a summary of all that we've talked about, really, I think.
Yeah. I would say, I think for me, it's really grounded in that and in time with God, you know? And so, for me, a practice that I really try to do, but I definitely fall away from it sometimes, is the practice of silence and solitude. So it's trying to be with God in a silent where I'm not being productive. And, you know, sometimes like prayer or even reading the Bible, both of those things can feel productive and they're really great. And those things come more naturally to me than just being silent. Sure. But I think trying to be silent and alone with God is something that has been really meaningful to me over especially the last, I'd say like 7-8 years. And allowing, I think it's in those spaces that I am able to give myself for who I am, you know, for all the, and also to give myself over to God, but also to accept that He loves me without all the productiveness, you know, like that I'm loved without all of that. I think, for me as someone who is a doer, I am someone who, and I am pretty achievement oriented, which maybe people wouldn't recognize if I have a resume, it doesn't maybe look very achievement oriented, but I am pretty, you know, I have different goals that maybe I've set or different things I do. And so, and I've been that way for a very long time. And so to be able to accept that without any of that, I am still a worthy person, you know, and that's been really important to me. And I think, you know, it helps me that definitely in my own house. I mean, I feel like I'm loved for who I am and not for what I do. I can, and so all of those things help. But I think that practice of silence and solitude has been really good for me in that because, just.
Well, I'm really resting in God's presence.
Right.
Know?
Yes.
And just like, because rest, it's part of the deal. God took a full day. and
That's right.
God's day is not a 24-hour day. So God took, you know, and to rest. I mean, it's one of staples that Christianity is built on, but yet it's really not, I don't think, lifted up the way it should.
Right.
I'm sure you talk about it more, but yeah, that rest piece is vital, because if we're not rested, especially with all the different directions you're running, we cannot, and getting that time just to fill up.
Right.
You have nothing to give from.
That's right. Otherwise, we're just running on emptiness. And I think that's also when we let other voices tell us who we, who we're supposed to be. And we let just whatever's the loudest voice speak into what's the most important thing, rather than having that time of quiet and centering. And I know that looks different for different people, but if we don't have some time of being centered, and for me, that's spending time with God, but just that learning how to be centered so that we can know our why, I think otherwise the loudest voices catch our attention, and that becomes our why when it's not really our why. It's just what we're being told we're supposed to care about,
Absolutely.
And so, and again, I think he gives all of us different things to care about. I mean, a huge thing for me is justice, but you can look at so many things in our world that are unjust, and different people are called to maybe work on different parts of that. We can't all work on every single part of it. We can care about all of it, but we can't, time-wise, we just can't dedicate ourselves to every single little thing. But we can, I think when we spend that time being centered, then God can show us what's our role to play in this, and where do we go? What's right around me that's mine to do. So many times we want it and not to do. So many times we want to go chasing after something that's really hard. I mean, it's hard to find, it's hard to do. And there could be something like just down the street that's very simple. That's ours to do. That's not hard. That falls very naturally within our gifts, within our circles, and so just keeping our eyes open to those things. And I think that centering time helps us.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think sometimes we worry about big impacts versus small impacts. And I think we have to get rid of that idea, and they're impacts. And wherever it is that you are designed, called to feel a passion for, to make, to be that impact. Because if we try and see, the other thing about it too is, if we're taking up space that's not ours to take up, we're not allowing space for that person that maybe it is theirs.
That's right. Yes.
To take up. And so, and that they're better suited for, and that the needle actually moves more because they're actually in the space that they're supposed to be.
Yes. I think about I was on this is the type of thing probably that you're talking about earlier, when you get asked to be in certain spaces just because of the role, so I was on a board pretty soon after I'd come here, and wisely, the preacher from our previous city had said, do not say yes to anything until you've been there a year. And I mean, that was wise. My unwise response was to ignore that. And so, but there was a board that I was on, and it wasn't a very good fit. And for just different reasons, it was a great board. It just, my time of life and what they needed, it just didn't match up. And I stepped off, and the people that stepped on that ministry nonprofit just took off. And so it was one of those things where I was like, well, I'm glad that me stepping off and these new people coming on. I mean, that wasn't the only thing, but those people were way more equipped to help this go forward. That was not mine to do. It wasn't something.
And that's okay.
Yeah, that's right. And that's okay. And it's great that they were so successful. Yeah. After I was on it, that's good too. I mean, it's,
absolutely.
So yeah.
We are down to our rapid fire. Name 5 activities that nourish you. All
right. Well, I've talked about this a lot, but time with God. I think being outside. So for me, I love gardening. I love to be outside. So running outside, walking outside, anything outside, I love to do. Unless it's really windy and there's a dust storm, and then I don't.
In Lubbock. That's a regular problem in the spring.
That's right. But right now it's really nice.
It's nice
to be outside. That's right. Time with my family, especially like around meals. I really love that. Just talking around the table is one of my favorite things. Reading a good book. I love to read a good book. So that's something that nourishes me. And then time with good friends. So again, often centered around food. Probably,
yes. Yeah. That's very Texas of you.
Yeah, that's right. Very Texas of me. Yes. But also, or going on a walk or something like that, so that's nourishing to me also.
All right. And 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
I know. Well, that's a harder one for me. How do I want to feel? I was
going back to a few minutes ago.
I know, that's right. Right. Thinking about feelings. I was thinking, so I want to feel content. That's something that can be hard sometimes to feel content. So I want to feel content. I want to feel peaceful. I want to feel joyful. I want to feel satisfied. And I think that means just satisfied that I'm doing the things that I should do and but not striving, I think, because striving is probably something that I am more likely to feel. And but that's not something I really am trying to not be someone who strives so much and who is more satisfied. So I think that's 4, but
I like that though. I like the striving piece, because I think that one is really, that's a struggle for a lot of us. It's a struggle for me, and kind of noticing that, what's that difference, and kind of working that out. I love that. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Audience, you're going to want to know all the things this woman is involved in and opportunities that you might get to hear from her if you live in different parts of Texas or even the country. I think she's going to be in Austin sometime soon speaking about something. So Austin friends, pay attention. But go to the show notes and the resources on embracinglayers.com. And you can see also the show notes are part of the podcast reel that goes out. So we're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those places that you find your podcasts. And we thank you so much for joining us today, Kaley. Appreciate your time. Yes. And thank you, audience, for joining us, and have a great week.